I'm very lucky. I have been very successful with juries, and it comes with experience. I don't pick a jury the same way today that I did, when I started 40 years ago. But we just had a case where a guy I'm sorry, I'm laughing at this. He had an illegal handgun. It was in his pants pocket, and he shot himself in the leg. And he was being obstinate. He wouldn't take any kind of plea. So I said, okay, we'll take it to trial. And you can get, in New York State, you can get 15 years for discharging an illegal firearm. And the jury acquitted him because there was no gunshot residue analysis done on his hand. And I'm like, I felt sorry for the assistant DA. He's a new kid. He's going to be an all-star someday. And he's like beating his head against the wall. And he goes, boss, did I screw up? I go, no, look, first of all, he's not contesting that the gun was in his pocket. He's just contesting that that somebody planted it there, that it went off by accident. And gunshot residue tests, as you guys probably know, have mixed results. A lot of police agencies don't even use them anymore. But there's an example, concrete example of a bad guy being, let go. He'll be back. Sadly, hopefully he doesn't kill anybody and shoots himself again in the leg. But there's a silly question. And the juror admitted. She said, I saw this on one of the shows, probably CSI, that they swabbed his hand, and you guys didn't do that, so we voted not guilty. And blah, give me a break.
Well, if the gun was in his pocket when it went off, maybe some other part of his body should have been tested for gunshot residue. But we don't have to get any more graphic than that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to be the one giving that.
Wanted to test it.
It almost appears, Bill, that when you're impaneling the jury and you're asking the questions, that maybe that needs to be a question. Thank you.
If I have a scientific case, I spend as much time as a judge will allow me in questioning the juries on what they expect and what not to expect. So there's no surprise in a case that I try, and the people that I train try, that they know essentially. I mean, I can't stand in front of the jury and say, look, if I find DNA here and fingerprints there and ballistics evidence over here, you have to be circumspect. But I do talk to them about what Jim refers to as the CSI effect, which is a very, very real phenomenon. And I just, I guess we're polarized in this country. It certainly seems that way. But I just read a fascinating scholarly article about polarization of juries, that they're not talking to each other. There was this big pharmaceutical case in Florida, and some people sided with the hospitals and some people sided with big pharma, and they went out, they took a vote. 3 days later, they had the same vote, and it wasn't necessarily like Democrat, Republican, but it was just, intransigence. It is almost becoming a way of life, and it's beginning to affect juries. I haven't seen a drop in my conviction rate, though. We'll try maybe 70, 80 felony trials a year, and pretty steady over the course of time, win about 85% of them, which is good.
I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact of the impact that the media and social media and TV can have on individuals that are going to be on our juries.
Ray, you're absolutely right. Now, I'll drop a couple of names. Stephen Avery, okay? Now, as in human events, it's difficult to reach a level of certainty. I am different than most people, probably like you two guys. I can look at something and I can say with certainty Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK. I can say with as much certainty as I can muster, not having been intimately involved in the case, that Stephen Avery killed Teresa Hallback. The idea that
this is a case up in was it Wisconsin or Minnesota?
Yeah, I think Wisconsin.
Yeah, but, and there was one documentary made.
There was a podcast, and he became the cause du jour because he had, on a previous conviction, been wrongfully convicted. So the theory was, and with all due respect, he was just a bad guy, and no question, he was the wrong guy. He should not have been convicted of his original crime. But with Teresa Hallback, I mean, the evidence was about as good as you can get in a circumstantial case. But he became then this symbol, this martyr, and it was all a media creation. Another guy that I think falls into that category is Adnan Syed, who's a popular subject of a podcast that ignores about 90% of the evidence against him. I understand, police corruption. I understand false confessions. I understand all of that. But at some point, you have to objectively look at the case and say, Adnan Syed, he did it. And I know that's still in litigation in Maryland right now.
Yeah, that
But
was he was
to answer your question, Ray, yeah, the media can be a two-edged sword, sometimes detrimental to the effective administration of justice.
I
I think
agree.
the first podcast I ever listened to was Serial, and it was about that Adnan case in Maryland. And you could be kind of convinced. I was listening to it with my, future wife at the time. She said, "Boy, I'll tell you some questions." And I said, you can have the best brain surgeon in the world conduct brain surgery, and you can bring other brain surgeons in and look at and it's successful. The patient is completely cured, we'll say. Other brain surgeons can come in and say, you know what, I would have cut there differently, a centimeter to the left. No, I would have given this drug in advance before. And you can do the same with a police investigation. And I think that's what I kept hearing over and over in the Adnan case. But real quick, I want to get into these couple of cases. But yeah, the art and even science of jury selection. I know people, and there's companies out there that's their full-time gig. They have lawyers on board. I know some have hired linguists, PhD linguists with whom I'm familiar, and their full-time goal is to go around the country and help prosecutors, but probably more likely defense attorneys, pick a jury. And they go through all kinds of biographical issues about jury members, likes, dislikes, gender, what have you. And it really has come down to definitely an art, but also I would say a science. But before we go too much further there, prosecutors have also told me, Bill, about another issue, which they're calling the false confession industrial complex. You mentioned that quickly beforehand. And now with everyone being Mirandized, that's been going on for 60 years. But now I think for the last 20 years, even the FBI is recording all interviews, all interrogations. And someone confesses, and they somehow have to come up with a way. And these usually the defense, of course, that would hire a false confession. I'm using air quotes if you're not watching us. False confession expert. They're usually psychologists, sometimes lawyers, and they will claim that the article "the" was used instead of and that changes the whole meaning. And we don't have to. We could spend the whole episode talking about this, but I'm sure you've had some of those in the courtroom, and I've heard a few of them talk, and it's a lot of. No doubt there have been some false confessions out there, no doubt at all. And whether intentionally, whether mistakenly, and you can break it down different ways, but it's also a thriving business for a lot of psychologists who they can't get billable hours anywhere else, so they go into this field.
And it's not just limited to false confession, so-called experts. I had an expert testify that a baby who suffered traumatic brain injuries, that was as a result of mold in her grandmother's house, if you can believe that. A real quick story about videotaping, because there's a law in New York State that I helped draft and get passed that when possible, all police interrogations be videotaped. So I was prosecuting a guy for murder, and he murdered his wife. Well, he was a suspect in murdering his wife, but their 7-year-old child was missing. So 2 weeks after the crime, I had him picked up on a parole violation, and he agreed to be interviewed. And during that 2 weeks and for the next subsequent 2 weeks, the entire community was searching for that little boy, James Jose Allen. We had his picture on milk cartons, public transportation. And 2 weeks before little Jimmy's body was found, this guy was interviewed for 6 hours. So on my summation, I wheeled over the videotape machine to show the jury the tape, and they rolled their eyes like, oh, God. I said, folks, I'm only going to show you 15 seconds. And you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. And I hit the play button. The detective looked at him and said, what do you think about your son? He was a very important part of my life. And I hit stop. And I looked at the jury and I said, I can play the other 5 hours and 59 minutes, 45 seconds. You won't hear Mr. Allen stutter one other time, but he stuttered over the word was. He referred to, now, if that hadn't been videotaped, I'm not sure the cop would have picked up on it, because he didn't pick up on it. And in fact, nobody picked up on it until I played it on, and the jury, a 3.5 month trial, the jury took one vote and convicted the guy.